Hey everyone, and welcome back. We love to go deep, and today's deep dive is all about the red, black, and green flag.
RBG.
Yeah, RBG. And we're looking at how this powerful symbol is influencing politics in Ghana. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on Richmond Bash and his presidential campaign.
Right. Bash is really trying to make RBG central to his whole platform. It's
Yeah.
not just symbolic for him.
Yeah, it's definitely more than just a visual. It's a whole ideology, and it's what makes this deep dive so fascinating.
Absolutely. We'll be looking at excerpts from this podcast called Voices of Change. It's where Bash really lays out his vision for Ghana.
Yeah, that's some great source material. And before we get into the specifics of Bash's campaign, let's take a step back for a sec. Can you give us like a quick refresher on what RBG actually stands for, for anyone who might need it?
Sure thing. So RBG is like the heart of Pan-Africanism.
Yeah.
It represents unity and liberation for people of African descent.
Right, like a shared identity and a push for freedom from colonial rule.
Exactly. And the colors each have deep meaning, like red, that symbolizes the blood shed by ancestors who fought for freedom.
Powerful imagery.
Yeah, and then black represents the strength and unity of the people. And green signifies the abundance and potential of the African land.
So it's like a visual representation of this whole struggle and aspiration for a better future.
It is. And Bash is really picking up that torch, so to speak, bringing those ideals into the 21st century.
He's saying RBG isn't just a relic of the past, it's a call to action for Ghana and the entire continent.
Right, he even uses this phrase, politics without borders, to describe his vision.
Okay, politics without borders. Now that's intriguing. We'll definitely have to unpack that. But first, what are some of the specific issues Bash is looking to address in Ghana, aside from just focusing on the legacy of colonialism?
He's talking about things that really resonate with everyday Ghanaians, like access to clean water, reliable electricity, quality education, and healthcare.
So the basic necessities that a lot of us take for granted?
Right. He's arguing that true liberation isn't just about throwing off the shackles of the past. It's about creating a society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
So he's trying to connect this grand historical ideology to the very real on-the-ground needs of people.
Exactly.
But how does he connect these everyday concerns back to this larger vision of a united Africa? That's what I'm curious about.
And that's where politics without borders comes in.
Okay, so tell me, politics without borders, what does that actually look like in practice? Because it sounds kind of radical.
It's a bold vision for sure. Imagine a doctor trained in Ghana being able to easily work in Kenya where there's a shortage of medical professionals. Or picture a Ghanaian entrepreneur expanding their business to Nigeria without facing tons of bureaucratic hurdles.
So it's about breaking down those barriers, allowing for the free flow of people, goods, and expertise across the continent.
Exactly. It's about leveraging the collective strengths of different African nations to benefit everyone.
So it's kind of like taking the concept of the European Union, but applying it to the entire African continent.
That's a good analogy. And Bash argues that this isn't just some utopian dream. It's a practical roadmap to unlocking Africa's true potential.
But Africa is incredibly diverse with complex political and economic realities. How does Bash address those potential hurdles?
He's actually proposing concrete steps, like investing in cross-border infrastructure projects, harmonizing trade regulations, and even creating a common currency for the continent.
Wow, those are some pretty ambitious goals.
They are, but he's looking at successful models of regional integration around the world and adapting them to the African context.
So he's not just pulling this out of thin air.
Right, he's drawing on real-world examples.
But it still sounds like a massive shift in thinking, not just within Ghana, but across the entire continent.
It is a paradigm shift. But Bash argues that it's necessary if Africa wants to truly claim its place on the world stage in the 21st century.
It's like he's saying we can keep doing things the old way and stay stuck. Or we can be bold and create a new future.
Right. He's really challenging the status quo.
And he's drawing inspiration from figures like Marcus Garvey, who dared to dream of a united and empowered Africa a century ago.
Yeah, he often invokes Garvey's legacy.
So in a way, Bash's campaign is as much about changing mindsets as it is about changing policies.
He's trying to reignite that spirit of Pan-Africanism.
That belief in a shared destiny.
Exactly. And that's what makes his campaign so fascinating. He's not just appealing to voters' heads with policy proposals, he's appealing to their hearts with this powerful vision.
Okay, so we've got the big picture of his vision. Now let's get into the specifics. I'm dying to know what kind of concrete actions Bash is proposing to actually turn this politics without borders concept into reality.
Because let's be real, A lot of politicians make big promises, but few actually deliver.
That's the truth. So let's see if Bash's plans have some substance behind them.
Well, one area he focuses on heavily is education.
Right, you mentioned that earlier. But how does he see education as a key to achieving this politics without borders idea? Is he just talking about building more schools?
It's deeper than that. He's talking about completely overhauling the education system to equip young people with the skills they need to thrive in a globalized world.
So it's not just about memorizing facts and figures anymore.
Exactly. He's talking about fostering critical thinking, creativity, and problem-solving skills. He wants to create a generation of young Africans who are ready to compete on the world stage, not just within their own countries.
That's a pretty ambitious goal, but wouldn't that require a massive investment in teacher training, curriculum development, and technology infrastructure?
Absolutely, it would be a huge undertaking. But Bash argues that it's an investment worth making. He sees it as the foundation for a truly transformed Africa.
It's like he's saying, we can't build a united and prosperous Africa without first investing in the minds of our young people.
Precisely.
Oh.
He sees education as the key to unlocking the continent's human potential.
Okay, so education is a big part of his plan. What else is he proposing to make this vision a reality? Because I'm sure reforming the education system is just one piece of the puzzle.
He's also emphasizing the importance of strong trade partnerships, but not just any trade partnerships. He's specifically talking about forging closer ties with other African nations.
So moving away from relying solely on trade with Europe or China.
Yeah, exactly. He believes that Africa needs to become more self-reliant and leverage its own resources and markets. He envisions a continent where goods and services flow freely across borders, boosting intra-African trade and creating new opportunities for businesses and entrepreneurs.
It's like he's saying, let's stop being dependent on the rest of the world and start building our own economic powerhouse right here in Africa.
That's a great way to put it. He's challenging the traditional model of development that relies on exporting raw materials and importing finished goods. He wants to see Africa move up the value chain and become a hub for innovation and manufacturing.
So education, trade, and what else? What's the third pillar of his plan?
The third pillar is youth empowerment.
Okay, that's interesting. But what does he mean by youth empowerment in this context? Because that's a phrase that gets thrown around a lot, but it can mean different things to different people.
In Bash's vision, it's about creating opportunities for young people to participate in the political and economic life of the continent. He wants to see more young people in leadership positions, driving change and shaping the future of Africa.
So not just token representation on youth councils, but real decision-making power.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He's talking about giving young people a seat at the table and allowing them to have a real voice in shaping policies that affect their lives.
And how does he plan to achieve that?
He's proposing things like lowering the voting age, providing financial support for young entrepreneurs, and creating mentorship programs that connect young people with established leaders in different fields.
It's like he's saying we can't talk about building a better future for Africa without including the very people who will inherit that future.
Exactly. He understands that young people are the key to Africa's transformation. They have the energy, the ideas, and the passion to drive change.
But empowering young people also means addressing the challenges they face. Things like high unemployment rates, lack of access to quality education, and limited opportunities for advancement.
Absolutely. And Bash acknowledges these challenges. He's not pretending that there are easy solutions,
Yeah.
but he's saying that we need to invest in young people and create an environment where they can thrive.
It's like he's saying, let's stop seeing young people as a problem to be solved and start seeing them as the solution to our problems.
That's a powerful way to put it. He's flipping the script and arguing that young people are Africa's greatest asset.
So we've got education, trade, and youth empowerment as the three pillars of his plan to achieve this politics without borders. Vision. It's a pretty bold and ambitious agenda.
It is. And it remains to be seen whether he can actually deliver on these promises. But what's undeniable is that he's sparked a conversation about what's possible for Africa.
And he's done it by tapping into this powerful legacy of Pan-Africanism and connecting it to the very real aspirations of everyday Ghanaians.
That's what makes his campaign so compelling. He's blending idealism with pragmatism, history with the present, and vision with action.
I'm curious to know how this resonates with our listener. Have you ever heard a politician talk about politics without borders before? It definitely challenges conventional thinking.
What are your initial thoughts on this concept? Does it seem like a feasible goal, or is it just a pipe dream?
It's easy to be skeptical of such grand visions, but sometimes it's those seemingly impossible dreams that end up changing the world.
Think back to the Pan-African movement of the early 20th century. It was a radical idea at the time, but it laid the groundwork for the decolonization movement that swept across the continent in the decades that followed.
So maybe Bash is tapping into something that's been brewing for a long time. A deep-seated desire for unity, self-reliance, and a brighter future for Africa.
That's a possibility worth considering.
I'm curious to see how he plans to overcome the inevitable obstacles that stand in the way of this vision. Because let's be real, achieving politics without borders would require a massive shift in power dynamics, both within Africa and on the global stage.
That's a topic we can explore further in the next part of our deep dive.
Stay with us.
So, picking up where we left off,
Yeah.
it's really interesting to think about those obstacles in Bash's path. Like, it's not just about practical challenges, infrastructure or economic disparities.
Right.
He's also up against this deeply ingrained issue of national sovereignty.
Oh, yeah. Convincing leaders to give up even a little bit of control to some continental body, that's a really tough sell.
It's like asking them to go against the very idea of what it means to be a nation state. You know what I mean?
It's like completely upending the way things have always been done.
Exactly. And think
Yeah.
about the historical context, centuries of colonialism,
Right.
then the Cold War and its divide and conquer tactics. It's all really solidified this idea of fiercely independent nations. It's like woven into the fabric of how African countries operate.
So Bash isn't just pushing for policy changes. He's asking for a fundamental shift in how African leaders view themselves and their place in the world.
It's a tall order for sure.
It is, but it's interesting how he's framing this whole challenge. He's not presenting politics without borders as a loss of sovereignty. It's
Yeah.
more like a pooling of resources and a collective rise to power.
Like everyone contributes to a shared pot that ultimately benefits everyone.
Right. It's like that saying, a rising tide lifts all boats.
Exactly. And he points out how Africa already collaborates on certain issues, like the African Union.
Okay, so there's a foundation to build on.
Right. It shows that cooperation is possible, even if it's been limited.
So how much buy-in does he realistically think he can get from other African leaders? I mean, some of them might see this politics without borders thing as a direct threat to their own power.
He addresses that concern head on. He says that a stronger, more unified Africa ultimately benefits all of its leaders.
Okay, so it's not a zero-sum game.
No. He argues that by working together, they can have more influence on the global stage.
Right, negotiate better trade deals, attract more foreign investment.
Exactly. It's like he's saying, if we want a seat at the table with the big players, we need to show up as a united front, not as a collection of fragmented nations.
I like that analogy. But what about the leaders who are resistant to change, the ones who benefit from the current system even if it hurts their own people? How does he plan to win them over?
He's appealing to their sense of pragmatism, their desire for economic growth and stability.
Okay, so it's not just about idealism. It's about showing them that this is in their best interest.
Exactly. He's saying politics without borders is a practical necessity for Africa to compete in the 21st century.
So it's a win-win.
He's also emphasizing the potential for increased trade and investment within Africa, which would benefit everyone.
Right, so he's dangling the carrot.
But let's be honest, we're talking about Africa here. Corruption is a huge problem in many countries. How can he ensure that politics without borders doesn't just become another avenue for the same old elites to enrich themselves?
Yeah, that's a valid concern.
And he's aware of it. Tackling corruption is a central theme of his campaign. He says that politics without borders actually makes it harder for corrupt officials to operate
Really? How so?
because it increases transparency and accountability.
Oh, I see. So instead of creating more opportunities for corruption, it actually helps combat it.
Exactly. He talks about the importance of creating a more integrated legal framework across the continent, making it harder for corrupt officials to hide assets or evade prosecution.
Closing those loopholes.
Right. He's also proposing an independent continental anti-corruption body.
Wow. With real power to investigate and prosecute.
Yes, regardless of their position or connections.
That's a bold move. I can't imagine that will be popular with everyone.
He's not shying away from the tough issues. He's confronting them head on and offering solutions that, while ambitious, are grounded in a deep understanding of how things work in Africa.
It sounds like he's walking a tightrope, trying to be both a visionary leader and a pragmatic politician.
He is. But there's something refreshing about his willingness to tackle these really difficult issues.
I agree. It's a different kind of political discourse.
He's not offering empty promises or simple solutions. He's engaging with the complexity and offering a vision that's challenging but potentially transformative.
So let's bring it back to the average Ghanaian citizen. How are they reacting to this politics without borders idea? Are they buying it?
The response has been mixed.
Yeah.
As you might expect with any radical proposal, there's a lot of excitement, especially among young people.
Right. They're the ones who stand to benefit the most from a more integrated Africa.
Exactly. They see it as a chance for a brighter future, a chance to break free from the limitations of the past.
But I imagine there's also some skepticism.
Oh, definitely. Especially among older generations who are more attached to traditional ideas of national identity and sovereignty.
Which is understandable. Change can be scary, especially when it involves something as fundamental as national borders.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there are legitimate concerns about how this would all work in practice. People want to know how their livelihoods would be impacted, whether their cultures would be preserved, how their voices would be heard.
So it's not just about selling the big picture vision. It's about addressing those very real anxieties that people have about what this could mean for their everyday lives.
Exactly. And that's where the details of his platform become crucial. He needs to connect this grand vision to the daily realities of people struggling to put food on the table, educate their children, and access health care.
Show them that it's not just an abstract concept, but a concrete plan that will make a difference in their lives.
Right. He needs to demonstrate that this can deliver real results for ordinary people.
But even if he convinces Ghanaians that politics without borders is the way to go, how does he get other African nations on board? He can't force them to join.
He knows that this is a long-term process. It will require patience, diplomacy, and persuasion. He talks about starting with smaller regional blocks.
Okay, so start small, prove it works, and then expand.
Exactly. Demonstrate the benefits and hope others will follow suit. He's also emphasizing building strong relationships with other African leaders, finding common ground and working together to address shared challenges.
So building a coalition of the willing.
Right. It's like a social movement.
Yeah.
Starting small, building momentum, and gradually expanding their influence.
It's an interesting strategy, but is it realistic? The challenges are huge, the stakes are high, and there's no guarantee of success.
True. But what's remarkable is that he's not just talking about what's possible. He's offering a roadmap for how to get there.
And he's capturing the imagination, inspiring hope, and challenging people to rethink what the future of Africa could look like.
It's a bold vision. But as we've seen throughout history, it's often the boldest visions that change the world.
Okay, so we've talked about the obstacles, the skepticism, the long road ahead. Now let's dive into the specifics.
Well,
What are some of the policy proposals that Bash has put forward to actually make politics without borders a reality?
that's a perfect segue into the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore those specific proposals in detail.
Stay tuned, because this is where the rubber really meets the road. Okay, so we've talked about this big vision of politics without borders. We've touched on the hurdles Bash might face.
Right.
But now let's get into the nitty-gritty. What are the actual policies he's proposing to make this thing work?
Well, one of those concrete parts of his platform is this plan for a Pan-African digital infrastructure network.
Okay, a digital network, I'm listening. But what does it actually mean? Is it just better internet across Africa?
It's way more ambitious than that. Think a continent-wide fiber optic network, a digital backbone connecting every African nation, high-speed internet data sharing, even e-governance stuff.
Whoa, so it's like physically connecting Africa digitally.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a massive project. How are you going to pay for it?
He's suggesting a mix of public and private investment partnerships with tech companies, international development organizations, even looking at things like bonds specifically for this project.
So thinking outside the box, not just relying on traditional funding.
Right. Got to be creative.
Right.
But beyond the money, how does this fit into his overall vision?
Yeah.
What's the point of this network?
It's a game changer on multiple levels. First, it tackles the digital divide in Africa. Millions of people would suddenly have access to information, education, economic opportunities.
Right now they're cut off.
Exactly. This levels the playing field. Second, it encourages more collaboration between African countries, scientists working together, entrepreneurs partnering up.
Breaking down those walls?
Exactly. And third, it gives Africa a stronger voice in the global digital world. Right now, they're mostly consumers of tech.
Made elsewhere.
Right. But with this network, Bash sees Africa becoming an innovator, making their own tech solutions for their own specific needs. Taking control of their digital future, I like it. But anytime you talk about this much connectivity, you got to think about cybersecurity, data privacy.
You're not wrong. Bash addresses that. He
Right.
talks about strong cybersecurity protocols, data protection laws, learning from what works in other places.
So it's not just building it, it's making sure it's secure. People's rights are protected.
Absolutely. Got to have those safeguards.
Okay, so the network's one piece. What other policies is he proposing?
Energy is another big one. He wants massive investment in renewable energy, solar, wind, geothermal,
Africa's got plenty of sun, wind, geothermal activity, right?
tons. He thinks Africa could be a global leader in renewable energy, not just meeting their needs, but exporting clean energy to other parts of the world.
So it's sustainable
Ah,
and creates economic opportunity.
exactly. Jobs, revenue. And this ties back to politics without borders. A continent-wide energy grid. Countries sharing resources, supporting each other.
Creating an energy system that goes beyond national borders. I like it.
It's a very different way of thinking about energy.
Okay, so we've got digital infrastructure, renewable energy. What else?
Healthcare is huge for him. He wants a Pan-African health insurance system, affordable health care for the entire continent.
That's a big goal. Healthcare systems are so complicated, and the quality and access vary wildly across Africa. How would this even work?
He's thinking a tiered system, basic coverage for everyone no matter their income or location, and then additional tiers you can buy into for more coverage.
So a safety net for everyone with the option to upgrade.
Right. He also talks about training more healthcare professionals, building more hospitals and clinics, especially in rural areas, using technology to improve access in remote areas.
This could really change millions of lives.
It has that potential. It's all part of his idea of shared responsibility, collective action. He sees healthcare as a right, not a privilege. And all African nations need to work together to make it happen.
Digital infrastructure, renewable energy, healthcare. These are all big, substantial policies.
Yeah.
It's clear he's put real thought into how to make politics without borders happen.
He has. And is both visionary and pragmatic. He's not just talking ideals, he's offering solutions with detailed plans and a deep understanding of what Africa's facing.
But can he actually deliver if he wins? That's the big question.
We'll see. There will be obstacles, vested interests, unexpected challenges. But what's exciting is that he's changing the conversation, pushing the boundaries of what people thought was possible, inspiring a new generation.
To imagine a different Africa.
Exactly. And even if he doesn't achieve everything he wants, he's planting seeds of change. That could grow in ways we can't predict.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Richmond Bash, what's the key takeaway?
Even with huge challenges, you can imagine a better future, come up with bold solutions,
Yeah.
and get people to believe that change is possible.
It's the big dreams that really change the world.
And here's a question for you. What if Bash's vision actually happened? How would it impact Africa, the world? Could this be a new model for how countries relate to each other? One based on cooperation, sharing responsibility, understanding that we're all connected.
It's a question worth thinking about. It challenges us to think differently, to imagine a future that's not written yet.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder those ripple effects.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time for another fascinating look at the ideas shaping our world.